A werewolf shifter romance, specially written for you. Prologue. They call me the Iron Alpha. They say my heart was forged in the same fire that consumed my father's village. I don't feel pain, I don't feel cold, and I certainly don't believe in fairy tales. But the Wailing Manor didn't care about my reputation. I moved to the outskirts of the Blackwood territory to escape the noise of the pack. I needed the silence. I needed a place where the only thing I had to lead was my own shadow. The manor was a rotting skeleton of Victorian stone and ivy, standing on a cliffside where the wind never stopped screaming. The local wolves warned me. "The soil is sour there, Alpha," they said. "The moon goddess turned her back on that house 100 years ago." I didn't listen, until the third night. I was sitting on the porch, the scent of the coming winter sharp in my nose. Suddenly the air changed. It didn't get colder, it got still. The crickets stopped. The wind died. And then a scent hit me that shouldn't have existed in a dead garden. Wild roses and cold ash. I turned my head, my wolf shifting behind my eyes, ready for a fight. But there was no intruder. There was only a girl. She was standing by the rusted iron gate, bathed in a light that didn't come from the moon. Her hair was like spun silver, flowing as if she were underwater. And her eyes, they weren't the gold of a wolf or the brown of a human. They were the color of the morning mist. I stood up, my hand going to the silver dagger at my belt. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just looked at me with a sadness so profound it made my iron heart ache. She raised a hand, pointing toward the dark woods beyond the cliff. "The hunger is coming, Alpha," she whispered. The sound didn't hit my ears. It vibrated inside my skull, and then she simply faded. One moment she was there, a pillar of silver beauty, and the next, there was only the smell of roses and the sound of the wind returning to the trees. I'm a wolf. I'm a predator. I fear nothing that breathes. But as I stood there in the dark, I realized I was falling for something that didn't even have a heartbeat. If you were in a house that you knew was haunted by a beautiful spirit, would you stay to find out her story? Or would you leave before the shadow she warned about arrived? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. Welcome back to Lily's Heart Tales, where the thin line between this world and the next is about to blur. To our new travelers, welcome to the Hollows. You've arrived just as the Iron Alpha begins to melt under a silver gaze. If you believe that love is the only thing that can survive the grave, hit that subscribe button and join our eternal pack. They say ghosts only stay behind when they have unfinished business. If you were Elowen, trapped in the mist for 100 years, what would be the one thing you'd miss most about being alive? Let me know in the comments. I'll be hearting the most poetic answers. And if you're ready to step into the Wailing Manor, type "I see you" in the chat. Chapter 1. The morning sun did little to warm the Wailing Manor. It was as if the stones themselves were allergic to the light. I spent the day trying to convince myself that the girl in the garden was a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and the isolation of the cliffside. But my wolf knew better. He wasn't pacing in circles out of aggression. He was whining at the door, his nose pressed against the crack, searching for that impossible scent of roses and ash. "She isn't real," I muttered, slamming a heavy crate of supplies onto the dusty kitchen table. My beta Kale stood by the doorway, refusing to cross the threshold into the house. He looked at the peeling wallpaper and the shadows that seemed to pool in the corners like spilled ink. "The pack is talking, Silas," Kale said, his voice hushed. "They say you're talking to the air. They say the Iron Alpha is losing his edge to a house of ghosts. Come back to the village. We need you there, not here playing hermit in a graveyard." "I'm not playing, Kyle," I snapped, my voice echoing too loudly in the hollow room. "This territory is strategic. If I can't tame this manor, how can I expect to protect the border?" Kale shook his head, his eyes darting to a chandelier that was swaying slightly, even though there was no breeze. "It's not strategic, it's cursed. The last 3 families who lived here disappeared before the first frost. Just be careful. Some things are dead for a reason." After Kale left, the silence of the manor felt heavier, like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the library, a room filled with books that looked like they would crumble if I breathed on them too hard. If the girl existed, she had a history. I spent hours digging through moldy pack ledgers and property deeds. I found records of the Bloodwood lineage that ruled a century ago. They were a proud line, known for their connection to the moon, until a tragedy wiped them out in a single night. I pulled out a tattered ledger from 1924. The ink was faded, but the names were still legible. Alpha Thomas Bloodwood, Luna Sarah Bloodwood, and beneath them, a name that made the hair on my arms stand up: Elowen. The entry was blank where her mating or death date should have been. Instead, there was a single frantic note scribbled in the margin in a different hand. The shadow came for the silence. She is the anchor. Do not seek the girl. Elowen, I whispered. A sudden, sharp cold slammed into my back. The temperature in the library dropped so fast my breath hitched in a cloud of white mist. I turned, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark. She was there. She wasn't standing. She was hovering near the window, her silver hair shimmering like moonlight caught in a spider web. She looked more substantial tonight, the details of her lace dress intricate and beautiful, though the hem was charred as if by fire. "You found it," she said. This time I heard her with my ears, a sound like the first frost cracking on a lake. "Elowen?" I asked, my voice trembling in a way I didn't recognize. She flinched at the sound of her name. She drifted closer, her feet inches above the dusty floorboards. She stopped just out of reach, her mist-colored eyes searching mine. I could see the library shelves through her torso, but the grief on her face was the most solid thing in the room. "You shouldn't stay here, Silas," she said. "The Iron Alpha thinks he is strong, but the Shadow doesn't eat muscle. It eats memories. It's why I'm still here. I'm the only memory it hasn't finished yet. I'm not leaving you," I said, stepping forward. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You can't even touch me. How can you stay with a ghost?" She reached out, her pale hand hovering near my chest. I felt a sensation like an ice cube being pressed against my skin, even through my thick leather jacket. My wolf surged forward, not to hunt, but to protect. Before I could speak, she vanished again, leaving behind a single frozen rose petal on the open ledger. I looked at the petal. It was real. It was physical. She was reaching across the veil, and I realized with a terrifying jolt that I didn't want to pull her into my world. I wanted to follow her into hers. The frozen rose petal sat on the ledger like a drop of winter. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom chill of Elowen's hand against my chest. My wolf was restless, pacing the length of the master bedroom, his claws clicking rhythmically against the hardwood. He wasn't guarding against an intruder. He was waiting for a guest. As the first gray light of dawn bled through the cracked window panes, I headed outside. If Elowen was the anchor, then there was something physical tying her to this patch of earth. The garden of the Wailing Manor was a graveyard of things that refused to bloom. Thorny vines of dead briar choked the stone statues, and the air always felt 5 degrees colder than the forest just 10 yards away. I grabbed a rusted shovel from the shed and began to clear the overgrowth near the spot where I had first seen her. The work was brutal. The earth was packed tight, frozen and stubborn as if it were holding on to its secrets with clenched fists. I hacked through the thicket for hours, the scent of crushed dry leaves and cold dirt filling my lungs. And then my shovel hit something solid. Clink. It wasn't a rock. It was the sharp, flat sound of stone hitting stone. I dropped to my knees, using my bare hands to sweep away the layers of rotted mulch and dirt. Hidden beneath a curtain of dead ivy was a headstone. It was small, modest, and made of white marble that had turned a sickly gray over the decades. I wiped the grime from the surface, and the words carved there chilled me more than the morning frost. Elowen Bloodwood, The Moon's Silence, 1906, 1924. She is not dead, but sleeping in the shadow's throat. My heart thudded against my ribs. In the shifter world, we don't bury our alpha's kin in secret, overgrown corners of gardens. We burn them in the pyre so their souls can join the great hunt in the sky. To be buried in the earth, especially with an inscription like that, was a sign of a curse, a binding. They didn't bury me to honor me, a voice whispered. I spun around. Elowen was standing at the edge of the briar patch. In the morning light, she looked like a smudge of smoke against the trees. Her eyes were fixed on the grave, a look of profound horror on her face. They buried me to keep the shadow fed, she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. My father thought he was making a deal. To save the pack from the great blight, he promised the soul of the silence. He didn't know that the shadow doesn't just take, it stays. Elowen, I can move this, I said, reaching for the headstone. I can give you a proper pyre. I can set you free. No, she shrieked. The sound was like a glass window shattering. The wind suddenly whipped up, swirling the dead leaves into a violent vortex around the grave. The sky darkened as if a veil had been pulled over the sun. From the hole I had dug, a thick, oily black mist began to seep out of the earth. It didn't look like smoke. It looked like living ink. I shifted instantly, my massive gray wolf form standing between Elowen and the rising darkness. I growled, a sound that shook the very ground, but the mist didn't flinch. It began to take shape, a towering, formless mass of teeth and claws that smelled of wet fur and ancient decay, the Shadow Stalker. Elowen screamed, her form flickering wildly as if she were a candle in a gale. It's waking up, Silas. You've disturbed the tether. Run! The creature lunged, a claw made of pure darkness swinging toward my throat. I snapped at it, but my teeth passed right through the mist. It was like fighting a nightmare. Suddenly, Elowen flew forward. She didn't strike the creature, she threw herself into me. The moment her spectral form collided with my wolf, a shock of absolute zero hit my heart. My fur turned to white frost, and for a split second, I saw what she saw. I saw a network of black chains extending from the grave, wrapped around Elowen's soul and stretching deep into the foundations of the manor. The force of the impact threw me back out of the garden and onto the gravel path. I shifted back to human, gasping for air that felt like liquid nitrogen. The Shadow Stalker hissed, a sound that felt like sandpaper on my brain, before it retreated back into the earth, the black mist vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The garden returned to its eerie silence. Elowen was gone. The grave was still there, a jagged wound in the earth. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear but from the cold. A single frost-white handprint was burned into the skin of my forearm, exactly where Elowen had touched me. She wasn't just a ghost, she was a prisoner, and I had just accidentally rung the dinner bell for the thing that owned her. Chapter 2. I sat in the middle of the library, the frost-white handprint on my forearm glowing with a faint, eerie light in the darkness. It didn't hurt. It was beyond pain. It felt like a piece of my soul had been replaced by a window to a cold, empty winter. Silas. The voice didn't come from the shadows this time. It came from the air right in front of my face. Elowen shimmered into existence, sitting on the edge of the mahogany desk. She looked exhausted, her silver form translucent enough that I could see the titles of the books behind her. You should have run when the ground broke, she whispered. Her voice was no longer just a chime. It was heavy with a century of regret. The Shadow Stalker. It hasn't tasted fresh alpha blood in a very long time. It liked the way you fought back. I rubbed the frost mark on my arm, the skin beneath it numb. I don't care what it likes, Elowen. I saw the chains. I saw what your father did. How do I break them? How do I get you out of that hole? Elowen shook her head, her hair moving like silk in slow motion. You can't just dig me up, Silas. The stalker isn't a creature you can kill with silver or teeth. It is a parasite of the pack. It was born from the first betrayal in shifter history, the first time a wolf killed their own kin for power. She stood up, gliding toward the center of the room. As she moved, the shadows on the walls seemed to shrink away from her, not out of fear, but as if they were waiting for her light to fail. 100 years ago, my father's pack was dying of the red blight, she began, her eyes distant. The moon goddess wouldn't answer his prayers, so he went to the below. He called upon the stalker. It promised to take the sickness from the wolves, but it demanded a vessel to store it in, a soul that was pure, silent, and connected to the moon. He chose you, I growled, the iron in my heart turning to molten lead. He didn't think it would be forever, she said softly. He thought I would just sleep. But the stalker doesn't store the darkness. It feeds on it. It turned me into its anchor. As long as I am bound to that grave, the stalker can roam this territory. It's what took the families who lived here before you. It didn't kill them for meat. It killed them to keep the silence fed. The silence? Me, she whispered. I am the moon's silence. As long as I don't speak, the stalker has no voice. But tonight, when I touched you to save you, I broke the silence. I spoke your name. A low, guttural vibration shook the floorboards. It sounded like a massive heart beating deep beneath the foundation of the house. Thump, 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 thump. It has a voice now, Silas, Elowen said, her form flickering with fear. And because I used your heat to manifest, it now has a map to your pack. It doesn't want me anymore. It wants a new anchor. It wants an alpha who is already halfway to the grave. She reached out, her spectral fingers stopping just a hair's breadth from the frost mark on my arm. The mark isn't just a touch, Silas. It's a bridge. You aren't just the alpha of the living anymore. You are becoming the alpha of the dead, and the stalker is coming to claim its crown. Suddenly, the library doors blew open, but it wasn't the wind. The air was filled with the sound of 1,000 wolves howling at once, but the sound was hollow, devoid of any life. Elowen's eyes went wide. It's not in the garden anymore. It's in the house. The library air turned into a liquid vacuum. The Shadow Stalker didn't enter through the door. It bled through the floorboards, an oily, ink-like darkness that rose like a tide. The phantom howling grew deafening, vibrating in my teeth until I felt like my skull would crack. Silas, get back! Elowen cried, but her voice was becoming thin, her edges fraying like old lace in a gale. The stalker manifested in the center of the room, a towering skeletal nightmare of shifting smoke and jagged bone. It lunged, not for me, but for the frost mark on my arm. It wanted its bridge back. I shifted. My gray wolf lunged at the smoke, but my claws met nothing but cold air and the scent of rot. The creature's hand, a claw of solidified shadow, slammed into my chest, and I felt my heart stop. I fell, my wolf form flickering, the world turning gray as the stalker began to drain the heat from my very marrow. Silas, Elowen's voice echoed inside my mind. You are an alpha of the living, but your heart is anchored to me now. Don't fight the cold. Command it. I looked up through blurred vision. Elowen was hovering over me, her silver form pulsing with a desperate light. She looked terrified, but she didn't run. She reached down, her hands moving toward mine. If I touch you now, the bridge will open fully, she whispered, her mist-colored eyes filling with tears. It will hurt. It will feel like dying. But you will have the power to strike what cannot be touched. Do it, I growled, my voice a ragged snarl. She pressed her palms against mine. The world exploded in a flash of absolute zero. It wasn't just cold. It was the absence of all existence. My wolf didn't just turn white. My fur became a crystalline armor of spectral frost. The mark on my arm surged, the white light traveling up my shoulder and into my eyes. I wasn't just Silas anymore. For this moment we were a singularity. I felt Elowen's memories. The scent of roses in 1924, the terror of the chains, the century of loneliness. And she felt my fire, the raw, pulsing strength of the pack, the iron will of an alpha. I stood up, my paws leaving frost cracks on the mahogany floor. I didn't lunge this time. I roared. But the sound that left my throat wasn't just a wolf's howl. It was a sonic boom of lunar energy. The stalker recoiled, its smoke-like body singed by the spectral cold. I lunged, and this time my claws didn't pass through. I tore a chunk of darkness from its shoulder, the flesh of the shadow dissipating into the air with a shriek that sounded like grinding metal. Elowen was the blade, I was the hand. We moved as one, a blur of silver and gray. Every strike I landed carried the weight of her century-long grudge. The stalker, realizing it could no longer feed, began to dissolve back into the shadows of the manor. It wasn't dead, but it was wounded, retreating into the foundations to lick its dark wounds. As the creature vanished, the connection snapped. I shifted back to human, collapsing against the desk, my lungs burning as they fought to breathe warm air again. Elowen slumped beside me, her form so transparent I could barely see her against the moonlight. I reached out, and for the first time my hand didn't pass entirely through her. There was a resistance, a faint humming vibration of energy. For a split second, I felt the velvet of her skin and the spark of her soul. We shared it, she breathed, her eyes wide. The living and the dead. We shared the strength. I looked at the frost mark on my arm. It was no longer a dull glow. It was a silver sigil, permanently etched into my skin. The night isn't over, Elowen, but now I know how to fight for you. But as I looked at her, I saw the fear return to her face. She looked toward the window, where the first hint of a blood-red moon was beginning to rise. The stalker didn't leave because it was defeated, she whispered. It left because it found what it was looking for. It has my father's scent. It's going to the village, Silas. It's going to find the descendants of the pack that traded me away. My blood turned to ice for a different reason. My pack. My family. Chapter 3. The village was a 5-mile sprint through the jagged pines, and every second felt like a drop of my own blood hitting the snow. Through our spectral bond, I could feel the Shadow Stalker's hunger spreading like a cold oil slick toward the pack house. I could hear the distant panicked howls of my sentries. They were fighting a mist they couldn't see and a terror they couldn't name. I have to go, I rasped, grabbing my coat, though the silver mark on my arm was already radiating enough cold to freeze the sweat on my brow. If you leave the manor grounds, the bond will stretch, Elowen warned, her form flickering like a dying candle. The further you get from my grave, the more the stalker will pull on your life force to stay manifested in the village. It will drain you dry before you reach the gates, Silas. I stopped at the threshold of the library. Then tell me how to end it. Not just for tonight. For good. Elowen's face went pale, or as pale as a spirit could get. She drifted toward a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, one I hadn't seen before. With a flick of her translucent hand, a rotted wooden slat popped up, revealing a book bound in what looked like gray wolfskin. This is my father's journal, she whispered, the part he didn't want the pack to see. He didn't just make a deal, he performed the rite of the substituted soul. I flipped through the pages, the ancient text blurring before my eyes. My wolf growled deep in my chest as I translated the jagged runes. The ritual was a darkened version of the mate bond. It required an alpha to voluntarily tether their living spark to the dead anchor. The stalker feeds on the silence because I have no heartbeat to resist it, Elowen explained, her voice trembling. But if a living alpha steps into the circle, if he offers his flesh and flame to the grave, the stalker is forced back into the below to process the life force. It buys the pack a generation of peace. But what happens to the alpha? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He becomes like me, she said, a single silver tear tracing a path down her cheek. A ghost in his own house, a guardian of the veil. You would never lead your pack again, Silas. You would never feel the sun on your skin or the wind in your fur. You would be trapped here, with me. I looked out the window. In the distance, a column of black smoke was rising from the village. The stalker had found the nursery. The choice was a jagged blade in my gut. I could remain the Iron Alpha, lead my pack to a slow, agonizing death against an invisible enemy, and watch Elowen eventually fade into nothingness. Or I could become the very thing I had feared, a shadow, to ensure my people lived to see tomorrow. I spent my life building a wall around my heart, I said, looking at the frost mark on my arm. It wasn't a curse anymore. It was a bridge. I thought being an alpha meant being the strongest, but it means being the one who carries the weight so no one else has to. I walked to the center of the library, drawing my silver dagger. I didn't point it at the shadows, I pointed it at the palm of my hand. Elowen, if I do this, if I step into the veil, can we really stop it? We wouldn't just stop it, she said. drifting closer until I could feel the hum of her energy against my skin. We would be the new gatekeepers. The stalker couldn't return as long as our bond held the door shut. But Silas? It's an eternity in the gray. I looked into her morning mist eyes and saw the century of loneliness I was about to share. And strangely, for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I've lived in the light and felt nothing, I whispered. I'd rather live in the dark and feel you. I slashed my palm, the red blood steaming in the preternaturally cold air, and pressed it against the silver oak floorboards. The ritual had begun. The library was trembling. Every window pane rattled in its frame as the Shadow Stalker, miles away in the village, felt the first pull of the right of the substituted soul. It was a tug of war across the territory, with my very soul acting as the rope. I stood in the center of the blood-drawn circle. My skin was already turning a translucent marble white, and the air around me was so cold it began to snow, indoors. "Silas, stop," Elowen whispered, her spectral hands trembling as she reached for my face. "The ritual is working too fast. If you finish the chant, you won't just be a ghost. You'll be a part of the house itself. You'll be a statue of ice and memory." I looked at my hand. I could see the floorboards through my palm. "The stalker is at the nursery doors, Elowen. I can feel its teeth through the bond. If I don't give it a bigger prize, if I don't give it me, those pups won't see the sunrise." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see a ghost. I saw a woman who had been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her. "I spent my life leading a pack by the iron in my blood," I said, my voice sounding like a distant echo. "But I never knew what I was leading them for until I saw you. I'm not just doing this for the village. I'm doing this so you never have to be alone in the dark again." I closed my eyes and spoke the final forbidden word of the rite. A pillar of black and silver light erupted from the floor, swallowing me whole. I felt my heartbeat slow and then stop, but there was no pain. Only a profound, shattering silence as the Iron Alpha died, and the Guardian of the Veil was born. Chapter 4. The moment my blood touched the floorboards, the library didn't just go dark, it inverted. The solid oak walls dissolved into misty silhouettes. The floor beneath my feet felt like it turned from wood to frozen water. My ears popped as the sound of the world, the wind, the distant screams from the village, even the sound of my own breathing, suddenly vanished. It was replaced by a low rhythmic thrumming like the heartbeat of the earth itself. "Silas, don't let go of my hand," Elowen's voice echoed, sounding clearer and more vibrant than ever before. I looked at her. In the world of the living, she was a fading shimmer. Here in the gray, she was radiant. Her skin had a pearlescent glow, and her dress billowed in a wind I couldn't feel yet. For the first time when I reached out, my hand didn't pass through hers. I felt her fingers, cold as ice but solid and real. "I'm here," I rasped. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from a mile away. I looked down at my own body. I was becoming translucent. The red blood on my palm had turned to a shimmering silver ichor. My wolf, usually a roaring presence in my mind, was silent, its fur turning into the same mist that made up the sky. "We are in the between now," Elowen whispered, her eyes darting toward the garden. "The stalker is the master of this realm. It sees us not as enemies but as intruders in its larder." The garden was no longer a tangle of dead briars. In the Vale, it was a forest of towering black glass shards, reflecting every nightmare the pack had ever had. And in the center, standing over the open wound of the grave, was the Shadow Stalker. In the physical world, it was a cloud. Here, it was a god. It stood 12 feet tall, a skeletal titan draped in the tattered souls of everyone it had ever consumed. Its eyes were twin voids that leaked liquid shadow. As it saw us, it let out a roar that wasn't a sound, but a wave of pure, unadulterated despair. "The Alpha comes to pay the debt," the stalker's voice vibrated through my very marrow. "One soul for 1,000, one heart to feed the void." The creature lunged, its glass-like claws swiping through the mist. I didn't wait for it to reach us, I shifted. In the Vale, my transformation wasn't a matter of bone and muscle. It was a matter of will. I became a massive spectral wolf of white flame and silver smoke. I lunged, meeting the stalker midair. When our bodies collided, it wasn't the sound of flesh hitting flesh. It was the sound of a glacier cracking. The stalker's cold was absolute, but for the first time I had a weapon it couldn't ignore. The bond. As I bit into the stalker's neck, I felt Elowen's power flowing through me. She wasn't standing on the sidelines. She was the anchor that kept me from being blown away by the stalker's darkness. Every time the monster tried to pull me into the abyss, Elowen's hand on my spectral fur pulled me back. "You have no power over the living," I roared, the silver light from my throat illuminating the glass forest. But the stalker laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "You are no longer living, Alpha. You stepped into the veil. You are mine." The black glass shards around us began to vibrate, rising from the ground and pointing at my heart. The stalker wasn't just fighting me. It was using the weight of the entire graveyard to crush my soul. I felt my silver light begin to flicker. The ritual was taking its toll. My life force was draining into the earth, fueling the barrier that would eventually trap the stalker, but I was weakening too fast. "Silas!" Elowen cried, stepping between me and the glass shards. "It's too much, you're fading." "I'm not leaving them," I gritted out, my spectral form shrinking as the cold took hold. I looked through the glass forest, and for a second the veil thinned. I saw my pack house in the distance. I saw Kale and the others holding torches, looking toward the manor with fear and hope. I realized then that the ritual wasn't about dying. It was about becoming the shield. The Shadow Stalker roared, its glass shard claws raking across my spectral chest. In this realm, the wounds didn't bleed red. They leaked silver mist. I was losing the battle. The stalker was older, hungrier, and fueled by a century of stolen lives. "You are a fool, little wolf," the stalker hissed, its voice like grinding stones. "You traded a throne for a grave. You traded a pack for a girl who is already nothing." It pinned me against a shard of black glass, its void-like eyes inches from mine. I felt my silver light fading. The ritual had given me the ability to fight the dead, but it hadn't given me the strength to win. "One soul for 1,000, the stalker chanted. "The trade is incomplete. I will take you, and then I will return for the pups." "No," a voice rang out. It wasn't my voice. Elowen stepped forward. She wasn't flickering anymore. Because I had anchored my life force to her, she was becoming more solid by the second. She reached out and grabbed the stalker's arm. The moment she touched the monster, her silver light didn't dim. It flared. "You called me the Silence for 100 years, she said, her voice echoing with the power of 1,000 ancestors. "But silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the moment before the storm." She looked at me, and I saw the true price of the ritual. To save me, to save the pack, she was prepared to do the one thing she feared. She was going to merge her soul entirely with the stalker to pull it back into the abyss forever. "Silas," she whispered through the mental link. "I'm the anchor, but you're the chain. Hold me. Don't let the abyss take me with it." The stalker shrieked as Elowen began to glow with a blinding lunar intensity. She was turning herself into a bomb of pure moonlight. Chapter 5. The gray world was shattering. The black glass trees of the garden were exploding into shards as Elowen's light reached a terminal frequency. She was no longer just a girl in a lace dress. She was a supernova of lunar energy, her arms wrapped around the Shadow Stalker like a cage of white fire. "Silas, let go," she screamed, her voice echoing from every direction at once. "The ritual is complete. The stalker is being pulled back. If you stay connected to me, you'll be dragged into the below." I felt the suction of the abyss, a terrifying silent vacuum opening up beneath the stalker's feet. It was a mouth of pure nothingness, a place where memories go to die. The stalker shrieked, its skeletal form dissolving into oily smoke as it was sucked downward. But Elowen was being pulled with it. Because I had anchored my living spark to her, I was the only thing keeping her in the veil. But the weight of the abyss was infinite. I felt my spectral fingers slipping. My white flame fur was being extinguished by the rising tide of shadow. I told you, I projected through the bond, my consciousness flickering. I'd rather live in the dark and feel you than live in the light and feel nothing. I dug my spectral claws into the frozen water of the Vale's floor. I pulled back with everything I had, not just my strength as an alpha, but the weight of every rose she'd ever smelled, every lonely year she'd endured, and every beat of the heart I had sacrificed for her. The stalker gave one final bone-chilling roar before it was swallowed by the void. The vacuum snapped shut. Silence. The gray world went still. The black glass forest was gone, replaced by a vast empty expanse of silver mist. I was lying on the ground, my form so thin I was practically invisible. Elowen was lying a few feet away. She wasn't glowing anymore. She looked gray. Her eyes were closed and her form was fading into the mist. The stalker had taken too much. She was finally passing on, not to the world of the living, and not to the abyss, but to the great beyond, where I couldn't follow. Elowen. I tried to crawl toward her, but I couldn't move. My iron resolve was broken. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, the Iron Alpha wept. A single tear, not made of silver mist or spectral energy, but a tear of pure, concentrated grief, fell from my eye. Because I was currently a denizen of the Vale, that tear carried the entirety of my life spark, the final ember of the fire I had brought from the living world. The tear hit Elowen's cheek. It didn't pass through her. It turned into a drop of liquid moonlight. The silver drop spread across her skin, turning the gray back into pearlescent white. It flowed into her chest, and for the first time in 100 years, a sound echoed through the silence of the Wailing Manor. Thump. A heartbeat. It wasn't a spectral hum. It was the heavy, wet, rhythmic thud of a living heart. The moon goddess had seen the trade. An alpha had given his life for a ghost. The ghost had given her peace for the pack. The law of the below had been satisfied, and the above was stepping in to claim the balance. Elowen's eyes snapped open. They weren't morning mist gray anymore. They were a vivid electric violet, the color of the sky just before the dawn. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her touch wasn't cold. It was warm. Silas, she breathed. As she spoke my name, the silver light from her heart surged through our joined hands. It didn't just heal me. It remade us. The veil around us began to dissolve. But we weren't falling into the abyss. We were being pushed back toward the library, back toward the scent of old books and the rising sun, back to the world where the wind actually moved the grass. The library was silent, but it was no longer heavy. The air was filled with the smell of wet earth and the first warmth of a sun that was finally allowed to touch the floorboards. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the hardwood, my fingers curled into Elowen's. I felt the grain of the wood beneath my back, the itch of dust in my throat, and most importantly, the frantic, beautiful thud of my own heart. I sat up gasping and looked at Elowen. She was sitting up beside me, her chest heaving as she tasted her first breath of air in 100 years. Her lace dress was no longer a tattered shroud. It looked like spun silk. But it was her eyes that held me, violet and vibrant, reflecting a world she had only watched from the shadows. "We're here," she whispered, her voice no longer a mental echo, but a soft, physical melody. "We're really here." I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched her cheek. It wasn't an ice cube. It was soft, warm, and alive. I pulled her into me, burying my face in the crook of her neck, smelling the roses without the ash. But the peace didn't last long. From outside the manor, the sound of engines and the crunch of gravel signaled the arrival of the pack. I could hear Kale's voice, sharp with grief and authority. "Secure the perimeter," Kale shouted. "The shadow is gone from the village, but the Alpha didn't come back. We enter the manor on my signal. Prepare the pyre. We're bringing him home." I stood up, my legs feeling heavy and new. I looked at the frost mark on my arm. It had changed. It was no longer a white burn. It was a silver tattoo of a crescent moon wrapped in iron vines. "They think I'm dead," I said, looking at Elowen. and they don't know who you are. Then let's show them, she said, taking my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, the strength of a girl who had survived the abyss. We walked out of the library, through the grand foyer, and pushed open the massive oak doors of the Wailing Manor. The scene in the driveway froze. Kyle stood at the head of a dozen warriors, their torches flickering in the dawn light. He had been holding my leather jacket, the one I'd left behind during the ritual, clutching it like a relic. When he saw me, he dropped it into the dirt. "Silas?" he breathed, his face turning pale. You were gone. Your scent disappeared from the link. We thought—" His eyes drifted to Elowen, and the warriors behind him scrambled back, some shifting halfway into their wolf forms. "The ghost!" one of the younger sentries yelled. "The Alpha is possessed. He's brought the spirit out. Stand down!" I roared. The sound was different now. It didn't just carry the authority of an Alpha, it carried the resonance of the veil. It was a sound that commanded both the living and the shadows. Kale stepped forward, his eyes fixed on our joined hands. "Silas, what happened? This girl. She has a heartbeat. I can hear it from here. But she smells like the moon itself." "This is Elowen Bloodwood," I said, my voice steady as I looked over my people. "The daughter of the lineage this pack betrayed a century ago. She was the price for your ancestors' lives, and tonight, she was the reason you're still breathing." I felt Elowen squeeze my hand. She stepped forward, her violet eyes scanning the wolves who had feared her name for generations. "The Shadow Stalker is gone," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "The debt is paid. Your Alpha didn't just save me. He gave me a reason to come back. We aren't here to haunt you. We're here to lead you." Kyle looked from me to Elowen, then down at the silver mark on my arm. He realized then that I wasn't the Iron Alpha anymore. I was something else. A bridge. Slowly, Kale knelt in the gravel. One by one, the warriors followed, dropping their torches and bowing their heads. It wasn't the bow of subjects to a tyrant. It was the bow of a pack to a legend. The Wailing Manor was silent for the first time in 100 years. The screaming wind had finally died down, replaced by the sound of a pack coming home. The epilogue. The Wailing Manor exists no more. In its place stands the Dawn House, a sanctuary of white stone and open glass where the wind no longer screams. It sings. 5 years have passed since Silas walked out of the library with a ghost's hand in his. The territory has transformed. The sour soil of the cliffside is now the most fertile land in the Blackwood region, blooming with moon lilies that glow with a faint violet light at night. It is said that in this garden, the barrier between worlds is thin, but it is no longer a place of fear. It is a place of peace. I stand on the balcony watching the sunrise hit the valley. I am still the Alpha, but I am no longer iron. My leadership is no longer a wall, it is a bridge. The pack has changed too. We are known now as the Veil Guard Pack. We don't just hunt the living, we protect the borders of the spiritual world, ensuring that no other Shadow Stalkers can feed on the grief of the forgotten. Our warriors are trained to see what others cannot, and our healers use the spectral energy of the territory to mend wounds that once meant certain death. A soft presence settles beside me. Elowen. She doesn't hover anymore. Her feet touch the stone, and her skin is as solid and warm as the morning sun. She wears a simple silver circlet over her hair, which has kept its starlight sheen. Her violet eyes remain her most striking feature, a constant reminder of the lunar wraith she has become. "The pups are asking for a story," she projects into my mind, her mental voice a warm hum that vibrates in my chest. They want to hear about the Alpha who was brave enough to fall for a girl who wasn't there. I smile, pulling her close. I can feel her heart beating against mine, a steady, rhythmic proof of a miracle. We are the first of our kind, a living Alpha and a resurrected wraith, bound by a silver mark that neither life nor death can erase. "Tell them it wasn't bravery," I whisper, kissing her temple. "Tell them it was the only thing that made sense." Below us, Kyle is leading a group of young scouts. He looks up and waves, his face bright. The pack is flourishing. We have integrated the old ways of the Bloodwood line with the modern strength of the Blackwood wolves. We are a pack of two worlds, ruling the dawn and guarding the dark. Elowen looks out at the forest, her expression peaceful. She is no longer an anchor for a monster. She is the light that guides us. Sometimes when the moon is full and the air is still, we see other flickers in the woods, shimmers of those who passed on but haven't quite left. They don't haunt us. They watch over us, led by the moon's silence, who finally found her voice. I look at the silver mark on my arm. It is a part of me now, just as she is. I gave up my life to save her, and in return, she gave me a soul. The Iron Alpha is gone. The Guardian is here. And as the sun fully clears the horizon, turning the gray world into gold, I know that for the first time in 100 years, the Wailing Manor is finally quiet. Because love doesn't just conquer all, it remembers. Silas and Elowen's story ends here, but their legacy lives on in the Veilguard pack. What is one thing you've learned from Silas and Elowen about the power of memory and sacrifice? Share your final thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Thank you for being part of the Hollows on Lily's Heart Tales. Your support turned this ghost story into a legend. The book is closed on the Dawn House. Are you ready for our next adventure? Should we dive into the Omega who controlled the elements, or the rogue who claimed a lost goddess? Vote below.